We're going to be going over symmetry. So in your frame, it should be symmetrical. If you divide the frame in half, the left and the right side are going to be pretty much the same. It doesn't have to be perfectly symmetrical, but very close. So here, roads or walkways, and photographing from the center of the sidewalk, very symmetrical, or in the middle of a road. Bridges are also generally symmetrical, or walkways. Now here, the arrangement of elements on the shot to create symmetry along the lines and throughout the shot. So we have balanced symmetry. Bridges, very symmetrical. Divide the frame in half, and the left and the right side will equal and both be the same. Another bridge. Here we have a scene from Wes Anderson, very symmetrical. Or another movie scene from The Shining. And you could see when we divide the frame in half, it is very symmetrical or very much the same on the left and the right. It doesn't have to be perfectly the same, but very close. Here's another movie scene and another. Here we can see shooting up from the bottom, and we have a symmetrical scene or another building setup. Here we're looking at the Taj Mahal, and as simple as some windows and a person being right in the center. Now, symmetry doesn't have to be left and right. It could be from top to bottom. Now, here we have an asymmetrical. We have only one mushroom on the left side. Or here, once again, we have an asymmetrical. So we have 4 cups on the left and 1 cup on the right. So this would be asymmetrical. DOF, or depth of field. As you get to understand your camera better, we're going to have a range of, here we're looking at an example from f1.4 all the way to f16. If you notice that at 1.4, we have shallow depth of field. Compare that to f16, we have deep depth of field or more depth of field. So let's look at this a little closer from capturetheatlas.com. We can see on the right side, the flowers are in focus at f2.8. And as we increase the f-stop number, more items become in focus. So at f11, we have the flowers, the moose, and the tree are all in focus. We see at f5.6, we're kind of in the middle in our depth of field as far as seeing items in focus. So on the left side, do we have shallow depth of field or deep depth of field? Deep depth of field is where most of the items are in focus. And you could see on the left side, compared to the right, which we have shallow depth of field. Here we're looking at f40 and f3.5. At f40, we have deep depth of field. And at 3.5, we have shallow depth of field. So shallow depth of field, the object in the foreground is in focus and the background is out of focus. So same thing, shallow depth of field, and here we have deep depth of field. So we'd have a high f-stop number like 16 or 11. And then we have shallow depth of field. So the f-stop number would be like 2.8 or 1.4 or f2. Here we have deep depth of field. And once again, for shallow depth of field, we have just one item usually in focus. For deep depth of field, or in the diagram they call this large depth of field, most items are in focus. So comparing this from expert photography, at f2.8, we only have the little girl and the butterfly in focus. Compare that to f16, we have the dog, the girl and the butterfly, and part of the tree in focus. So as we go through depth of field, You want to ask yourself, what do you want in focus? Do you want most items in focus, or you just want a selective area in focus? And that'll help you decide what kind of depth of field you want in your photograph. Do you want shallow depth of field at here at f6.3, or do you want deep depth of field that we see at f16? Same thing with these puzzle pieces. Do you want just a portion of the puzzle pieces in focus, or do you want the whole puzzle piece in focus, or the board? The same thing with these flowers, shallow and deep depth of field, or these red berries on the table. Do you want just the berries in focus, or do you want the whole castle and the whole building in focus at f16? And as we look at the salad, we compare f8 to f2.0. Now, if we look at 2.0 on the right side, we can see that the tomato in the background and the piece of lettuce is really blurry. Compare that to f8. You can see the tomato in the background. You can see that a lot more clearly, and you can see a little bit of more detail in that lettuce leaf. Same thing with this hamburger from 2.8 to f32, or from 1.4 all the way to f6 or f14. As you look at the photographs, notice that the cupcakes become more and more in focus as the f-stop number increases. So here we have shallow or deep depth of field. Which one do you think it is? So, or this one. Now this item, you might think, oh, this is going to be shallow depth of field, right? Because of the blurriness in the water and in the clouds. But actually, I would say it's deep depth of field because how sharp the rocks are on the water. So this is deep depth of field with a long exposure, so long that the water becomes mist. So here is deep depth of field. The next item that we'll be looking at is framing, or frame within a frame. So we use framing elements. We frame the elements with something like a doorway, a window frame. So here we're using the archways to frame our photograph. So here we're using a corridor and an archway. Or you could use people or objects to frame. So here we have the two figures in the dress mannequins framing the woman in the middle. Or here we have an arch at the ocean. Or here we have a famous archway, I believe it's in Moab or somewhere where they have amazing rocks. And then when they full moon, it looks like it's a person's eye or an eye. And then here we have another frame within a frame. Now here we have a window looking into the scene, so a frame within a frame. Or in this example, we have the clouds acting as a frame. Then we have a circular frame. So that means that instead of using just a corridor or window, we actually use a circle. So here we have a circle within a circle, a frame within another frame. And we can see this in Sandra Bullock's body position. She's in the fetus position, which is also a circular, which also has the doorway to this spaceship, which is circle as well. Another Wes Anderson scene, and the boxes are in the form of a circle. And instead of like what we see before in Symmetry, where it was from left to right, this is from top to bottom. So we have circular and we also have it symmetrical. One shot can have multiple compositional elements. So here we see the framing is a circular format of the books and the papers, or here in the scene, even the back of the trainers and forming a circle. Or another movie scene through this conduit forming circular frame. Or here from another movie scene, we have a circle frame. And another reenactment of the Last Supper, which they have created also in the center with a circular composition. And then here we start to diagram. We have a circle within a circle, or here in Botticelli's painting, we can see a circular frame. Now, radial and circular, sometimes a radial can be circular, but a radial doesn't necessarily have to be a circle. I want you to really pay attention and look closely on this diagram. So we can see on the first row, second column, we have a radial. So it undulates outwards. It can be a rectangle. We could have like the moon. It could be some squiggle lines. In the circular, and the radial doesn't have to be symmetrical. So we can see that in the second column, or second row, third column. And also, a radial doesn't have to be in a form of a circle. We see in the bottom, 1, 2, 3, fourth column, third row, we have square within a square within a square. Also, if we look at the first column, last row, we can see that the circle has been divided. We only see a quarter of the circle, and it's also not symmetrical. Once again, a radial doesn't have to be circular, but many of them are. So here we can see a radial, like when a broken glass or a broken mirror or window. Stairways are very popular for radials. Looking down at the top, we can see this is a radial, radiates outwards. I always think of radial, I think of radiation, some kind of undulation of movement. Here we have a radial, which is also circular. And the majority of you will come up with radials that are circular, but they don't have to be. Plants, like flowers, generally are radial. And we can see when we divide them and divide them again. So multiple radials in this passion flower. And I want you to really pay attention because later on, we're going to be talking about this, how they're divided and what that means. How as photographers, how are they dividing the frame even more? So here's more radials, and sunflowers are also radials as well. Icicles, ice plants, radials. You can make your own radial. Here we just have some pencils pushed together, forming a radial. Or here a bunch of butterflies forming a radial. A lizard's tail, radial. Here's another stairway that's been photoshopped. Here's some more circles forming a radial. And here is a radial. This is where the shutter in your camera is open and you rotate the camera in a circle. Here's another radial, and it's not a perfect circle. You know, it's a hexagon maybe. Or here is another radial. Once again, it doesn't have to be a circle to be a radial, but a circular has to be a circle, right? Here's another radial and another. Once again, it doesn't have to be a circle to be a radial. And an asymmetrical radial, or this palm leaf. And, you know, think about this slide in particular when looking for a radial for your assignment.